Hello and welcome to NFL Memory Lane, the offseason series that's going to be covering named games or plays throughout the NFL history, talk about the lead up to those games or plays, and talk about the ramifications of those specific games or plays. We're beginning with the 2021 regular season finale between the Raiders and Chargers, which is known as the Take the Tie game.
What?
The 2021 regular season has its fair share of fantastic and great moments, all the way down to the Super Bowl between the Rams and Bengals. Before the playoffs even officially started, there was a playoff game underway in Las Vegas to decide the final two playoff spots. So let's rewind things to figure out how the season even got to this point. Three teams are the focus for this game, those being the two teams playing in it, the Chargers and the Raiders, and the team watching on the sideline holding their breath in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Starting with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're coming off of the 12-4 2020 season that saw them win the AFC North, but lose to the Cleveland Browns in the wildcard round, thus solidifying another disappointing season for the Steelers. Entering 2021, there was kind of middling expectations surrounding this team. It was going to be the final season of Ben Roethlisberger and this era of Steelers football as a whole. They had an over-under of 8.5 wins entering the season, and they sat at 20th in the preseason Super Bowl odds at plus 5,000. There was pressure on the Steelers to ride Ben Roethlisberger off into the sunset with a Super Bowl win, and they brought in rookies Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth to kind of try and be missing pieces, but more so also to look towards the future a bit. For the Raiders, this was their second season in Las Vegas, and the year prior saw them go 8-8 in the third year of John Gruden's second stint as head coach. Entering 2021, expectations were low for the Raiders. They had an over-under of 7.5 wins and plus 8,000 odds to win a Super Bowl that season. The expectation was another middling season and a kind of mess season as a whole, because it has been since 2016 for the Raiders to have a 10-plus win season and to make the playoffs. The Chargers had high hopes entering the season. It was the second year of new franchise quarterback Justin Herbert, and he's coming off one of the better rookie quarterback seasons we have seen. They had an over-under of 9.5 wins and sat at plus 3,000 odds to win the Super Bowl entering the season. They were expected to be a playoff team that could maybe surprise people here and there. Essentially, what was expected of the Chargers is what we saw of the Bengals in real life this season. The first domino to fall in the season would come in week 2 when the Raiders would take on the Steelers for the home opener at Heinz Field. Both teams sat at 1-0 entering what would be a defensive clash. The game started with the Steelers extending their streak of not scoring on the opening drive to now a total of 12 games. This was a streak that dated back to the 2020 season. Both offenses struggled to get anything going on the ground throughout the game, so it ended up being a quarterback duel between Derek Carr and Big Ben. The scoring got started with a 46-yard field goal from Daniel Carlson off the back of the lone interception of the game by Trevon Mullen. And this was just not a good throw by Ben Roethlisberger, one of the many kind of weird throws he made towards the tail end of his career. At the half, the score was 9-7 thanks to a Juju Smith-Schuster touchdown and another Carlson field goal to end the half. Both quarterbacks did play really well in this game. Ben ended with roughly 67% completion for just under 300 yards, a touchdown, and the lone interception as mentioned earlier, while Carr matched him by going 28 for 37 for 382 yards and 2 touchdowns in the 9-point victory for the Raiders. After week 5 and while the Raiders sat at 3-2, emails John Gruden sent back in 2011 were released to the public. The first batch was released by the Wall Street Journal, and in them it saw Gruden use a racial trope to describe then NFLPA Executive Director DeMaurice Smith. The New York Times followed this up a few days later with more emails which showcased Gruden using homophobic and misogynistic terms dating back to 2010. Gruden would make his decision to step down on Monday night after the Raiders lost to the Bears the day prior, so thus Rich Bisaccia would become the new interim head coach in Las Vegas. By the midway point of the season, each team sat at 5-3, and they would stick this close to each other throughout the rest of the season. The first week of the second half saw the Raiders and Chargers both losing, and the Steelers taking on the 0-8 Lions. Ben Roethlisberger would miss this game due to being placed on the reserve/COVID-19 list entering the week, and it would be the only game he would miss this season. So thus Mason Rudolph got the start for the Steelers this week. Mason Rudolph got the scoring started with a wide open touchdown pass to James Washington, but that was really all the offense was able to get done against the struggling Lions defense. And also, despite the fact that Najee Harris had 100+ yards on the ground in this game, and Mason Rudolph had a pretty fine game, 30 for 50 completion, 242 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. It was not a bad game. They just couldn't finish drives in this one. The game would eventually go into overtime where the Steelers would fumble, get lucky with a Lions missed field goal, and then fumble again with under 2 minutes, and the game would end in a tie. The following week, the Steelers were in Los Angeles to take on the Chargers, and Big Ben returns after missing the previous week. The scoring started with a Boswell 36-yard field goal, but this was a slugfest between the teams. Roethlisberger threw for 273 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game. Justin Herbert matched him every step of the way for 382 yards and 3 touchdowns, plus 90 yards rushing in this game for Herbert. This was a masterclass of a game for both quarterbacks, and it ended with a Justin Herbert 53-yard touchdown pass to Mike Williams to take the lead with 2 minutes left, and the defense would proceed to get the Steelers off the field in 4 plays to secure the 41-37 win. This leads into the final week of the season. The Steelers were 8-7-1, playing a must-win game in Baltimore against the Ravens, while the Raiders and Chargers played each other on the final game of the regular season on Sunday Night Football, with both teams at 9-7. There were 2 playoff spots up for grabs, and it started with the 1 o'clock game between the Steelers and Ravens. Tyler Huntley got the start for Baltimore in this one, and the potential final game for Ben Roethlisberger was a humid game that wasn't even a very great game for the offense. It was a kicker duel between Boswell and Justin Tucker that eventually found its way into overtime. The Ravens would get the ball first in overtime, and it was a 7-play drive with the former UCF native Latavius Murray getting back-to-back handoffs for 15 yards to start, followed by a Huntley scramble for 4 yards, then Murray for 2 more carries for 4 yards, and then 2 incompletions to stall out the drive. Ben takes the field and takes command. 4 of the first 5 plays were passes, with 3 of them being completed for 26 yards. In total, Ben went 5 for 8 for 47 yards on this drive, while Najee Harris had 5 carries for 20 yards to get down to the Baltimore 18-yard line before Boswell chips in the 36-yard field goal to win it. This, plus the Colts losing earlier to Jacksonville, sets the table for Sunday Night Football. The potential final 2 playoff teams are the Steelers plus the winner of the Raiders/Chargers, or both the Raiders and Chargers if the game somehow ends in a tie. So as all eyes are on Las Vegas as Tyron Johnson returns the opening kick to the 33-yard line, there are 3 fan bases hoping for any 2 of 3 outcomes. The Steelers hoping for either team to win, as they would get in as the 7th seed. The Raiders with a win would be the 5th seed, with a tie would be the 7th seed. And the Chargers with a win would be the 5th seed, and a tie would be the 6th seed. The Raiders on the opening drive would go 9 plays for 61 yards to set up a Daniel Carlson 24-yard field goal, and they would proceed to take a 10-0 lead into the second quarter thanks to a Hunter Renfrow 12-yard touchdown grab. Chargers would respond well in the second, with Austin Eckler having a 14-yard rushing and receiving touchdown. The Raiders quickly responded with a Waller completion to the 48-yard line, a 23-yard carry on 3rd and 23 to move the chains by Jalen Richard, Chris Harris getting a DPI penalty to put the Raiders at the 1-yard line, and Josh Jacobs finishing the job for the Raiders, having a 17-14 lead at the half. Chargers tried to tie things up on the first drive of the second half with a 51-yard field goal by Dustin Hopkins, but he would miss it wide left. A Raiders 3-and-out, followed by the Chargers being stupid aggressive on 4th down inside their own 20-yard line, led to the Raiders having a 6-point lead entering the 4th quarter. They would extend it to a 12-point lead 2 plays into the 4th, and a 15-point lead before the Chargers would respond next. It would be a 23-yard touchdown pass from Herbert to Palmer to respond next, and then the defense would force a 3-and-out, and in comes the 2-minute drill for Justin Herbert. The drive started from his own 17-yard line, and the ball was in his hands the entire time. 19 straight passing plays, Herbert going 6 for 19 on the drive, and it capping off with a 12-yard touchdown pass to Mike Williams, followed by Dustin Hopkins, sending the game to overtime with the extra point. So obviously, I went back and watched all the games featured in this video through NFL Plus, and this was a pretty tough drive to watch. Some of the throws that Herbert was making with the clean pocket was rough. The amount of times he even had a clean pocket to throw to looked pretty similar to this past 2025 Chargers team. The 4th and 10 throw early in the drive was a questionable decision that got lucky to get the yards needed. Norton, the right tackle, was in hell trying to block Crosby without any help the entire time. Herbert wasn't getting help either from his receivers, and with some pretty bad drops. At the same time, there was some bad penalties for the Raiders that kept the drive alive in the first place. Yes, it was a drive that made the end of the game interesting, but I wouldn't really call it a good drive either due to the sheer amount of miscues that were on it. But nonetheless, we have overtime. Raiders get the ball to begin the OT period at their own 25. Jacobs gets them past midfield and into field goal range with 2 carries totaling 46 yards. They would proceed to only gain 7 yards after on the next 3 plays and settle for a 40-yard field goal by Daniel Carlson. The Chargers then go right back to Herbert, having him throw 6 times of the 7-play drive, having 2 completions for 53 yards to set up a 41-yard field goal for Dustin Hopkins to tie the game. So the game is tied with 4.5 minutes to play in the game, and as it sits, both teams are in the playoffs. The first play of the following Raiders drive is a Bryan Edwards completion for 17 yards, followed by Josh Jacobs getting 7 yards on the next play, and then a 5-yard loss thanks to Derwin James. The third down gets picked up to the Charger 44-yard line thanks to Zay Flowers then after, so the Raiders are officially past midfield. This is the point where you can see the Raiders are killing clock as we're now under 2 minutes. They're trying to use all of it for one of two reasons. Either they want a field goal to be the final play and they're in the playoffs either way if it's made or not, or they're trying to set up the tie. Based on where they're on at the field and how much time is left, especially after Jacobs would lose a yard in the following play to begin the final 2 minutes, it's safe to say that the tie was definitely in mind, even if it wasn't their first priority. The next play, Jacobs picks up 7 to get to the Charger 39-yard line, and they would have needed to run one more play anyway from this point, but they did let 37 seconds run off the clock. From where they are located on the field, it would have been a career long for Daniel Carlson up to that point of a 57-yard field goal. His previous career long up to that point was 56, so in theory he could still make it from there, but it's not as likely. The Chargers would take a timeout before the third down play with the mindset of potentially getting the ball back. But also with that logic, why not call a timeout much earlier in the play clock when you had a lot more time remaining, instead of waiting as long as you did in the play clock? There was really no reason for the Chargers to call a timeout there, and you can see that by the reaction of the Raiders and by the announcers as well.
And the Chargers took the timeout.
I'm trying to process this myself.
Wow.
I know.
Now again, the Raiders were going to line up to run another play either way because they had to with how much time was remaining. But it's also very clear that what they called before the timeout was very different from what they called after it. The handoff to Josh Jacobs out of the timeout was clearly called to be the killing blow. Whatever was called before the timeout didn't have the same feel to it. Derek Carr's body language after calling the final timeout also signals to that, and also signals that there was something personal involved there. Carr said after the game that the timeout call by the Chargers did change their mindset, but obviously players are never going to go out there and directly say that they wanted a game to end in a tie in a moment like that as well. But they had another play called and were a yard away from field goal range, but it's very clear the timeout really made them want to end the Chargers season. Derek Carr was on Max Crosby's podcast not long ago and even said the same thing.
My favorite memory, besides beating Kansas City at home at their place, was probably calling the timeout to kick the Chargers out of the playoffs and send them home. Me and Bosa were great after, he said something, and then we get to play him at the end of the year. I'll see you soon. We end up beating them and calling that timeout, but just there was so much hype around that game. There was so much building up, and being able to be right next to Cleat, put that little smirk on my face and call that timeout. Because everyone's like, we'll take the tie. I'm just like, you guys really want to play Derwin James and Joey Bosa again? These guys are insane. Why don't we just send them home?
Daniel Carlson up to that point hasn't missed in Allegiant Stadium, and on the season he was 8 for 8 on lead-changing field goals in the final 2 minutes or overtime. So he lined up for the 47-yard field goal and
Snap good, hold good, and Raiders in, Chargers out.
the Raiders and Steelers were both losing the wildcard round, and the rest of the playoffs is how you know it, but it was nearly completely different. If the game did indeed end in a tie, the AFC wildcard round would have had the Bengals hosting the Patriots, Bills hosting the Chargers, and the Chiefs hosting the Raiders. I think the playoffs would have been drastically different because of this, for the main reason that the Patriots were a better team than the Raiders that season. The Patriots had the 6th ranked offense and the 2nd ranked defense in the league that year. The Raiders had a top 20 offense and the 26th ranked defense. The Bengals were barely able to survive the Raiders in the wildcard round that season. It was a 7-point game, and the Raiders had the ball on the Cincy 9-yard line with a chance to tie things up. I think the Pats would have beaten the Bengals that season if they would have played in the wildcard round, and from there, the entire landscape of the NFL looks completely different. The decision for Brandon Staley to call the timeout and not take the tie has changed the NFL over the past 5 seasons and where these teams currently sit. The goal is always to get into the playoffs by any means necessary, and the Chargers forgot that in the worst possible moment, and all Brandon Staley had to do was nothing and just take the tie. I appreciate everyone tuning in to the first episode of NFL Memory Lane. Typically, this is the point where I would spin a wheel to figure out what game or play we'll be talking about next, but I already have the next one in mind as there's only two for to begin this, and that's going to be the Jesse James no-catch game. This is a series that's partially inspired by Miniman's Awful Archaeology, so please check that out over there for him, and also just his channel as a whole. It's fantastic. If you're into archaeology or really history as a whole, it is a great recommend. So check that out. Appreciate everyone tuning in. I'll see you all next time. Have yourselves a damn good one.